Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Vianora Vinca. President Obama has pledged to resolve the question of Puerto Rico's political status before the end of his term. The Caribbean island has been a U.S. territory for more than a century, and Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. But the Commonwealth has no vote in Congress, and residents have no vote in presidential elections. On this edition of Independent Sources, the political future of Puerto Rico, status quo, statehood, or sovereignty. The economic crisis in Greece, preventing the drama from becoming a tragedy. And reporting on the pain, the emotional impact on Polish journalists covering a community in mourning. We'll have those stories and news of the week after this.
Ethnic media is a key, necessary, most relevant component to any democracy. And I know it's a painful shift for many people in this country. But now more than ever, we need coverage that comes from ethnic and immigrant press.
The President's task force on Puerto Rico began its fact-finding mission on the island recently, meeting with members of major political parties and other sectors of society. Judith Escalona filed this backgrounder on the issues surrounding the island's status.
Puerto Rico is the oldest colony in the world, and it is America's. President Obama declared he would resolve the political status of the Caribbean island before the end of his first term. Continued Commonwealth, independence, or statehood. To this end, he recertified Bill Clinton's presidential task force. It held its first meeting in San Juan this past month. Soon after, the Puerto Rican weekly Claridad criticized the body for its limited outreach. The Committee of 18 was also attacked for lacking Puerto Rican members. These are not new criticisms. In 2007, U.S. Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez of New York grilled the previous administration's task force and its findings.
Coming to Puerto Rico. So do you know how the people of Puerto Rico feel about this process? They are cynical, it lacks transparency, and it is totally unfair and undemocratic. That is what your task force report means for half of the people in Puerto Rico and for this member of Congress. We should be more serious and there should be more honesty when we are dealing with such an important issue that is going to affect 8 million Puerto Ricans.
Puerto Rico has been petitioning the U.S. to resolve the status issue because of its worsening economic crisis and growing labor unrest. Much touted in the 50s as an economic miracle that all Latin America should emulate, Puerto Rico still had a central unresolved problem: high unemployment relieved by migrations to the U.S. Today, those men and women and their progeny make up the majority of the 4.1 million who live stateside. Their role in Puerto Rico's future is hotly contested. Should stateside Puerto Ricans be included in the process of determining the status of Puerto Rico? I'm Judith Escalona, Independent Sources.
Joining me to discuss the politics of Puerto Rico's status is Dr. Edgardo Meléndez, Hunter College professor. Also with us is Dr. Andrés Torres of CUNY's Center for Puerto Rican Studies. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Meléndez, what makes the resolution of the Puerto Rico's political status a pressing issue for Puerto Rico and for the U.S.?
Well, I think it's more pressing for people in Puerto Rico than for people in the U.S. Right now, there's no interest in Congress in dealing with the issue of Puerto Rico. And although President Obama put in place the task force on Puerto Rico status, I don't think it's going to be going anywhere near soon. I don't think either the executive or Congress have any pressing interest on pushing this forward. Now, things are different in Puerto Rico. All three major segments of the political spectrum do have an interest in trying to push forward the issue of the status. Now, they are divided in terms of not only status options, but also strategies and how they are related to sectors here in at the U.S. So I think it's going to be very difficult at this moment to find a final solution to this problem.
Dr. Torres, what's the likelihood of seeing an outcome to this issue by the end of Obama's term?
Well, I concur with Professor Meléndez that the outlook here is not very positive for a change in Puerto Rico's status. There simply is not enough impetus on either side within the U.S., or there's not enough agreement, there's not enough consensus within the island's political structures and elites and so forth to push this in one way or another, where I see this in a situation of gridlock that could potentially endure for another few decades until just something gives, either culturally or economically or politically. And the problem has traditionally been with these processes of trying to resolve the status of Puerto Rico is that you know, there is this gridlock. There are economic and political, even cultural obstacles to nudging the balance of forces dramatically in any direction, either towards independence or towards statehood.
Speaking of the economic climate, Dr. Meléndez, is this an auspicious time to try push for a resolution on the issue, given Puerto Rico's economic troubles, the labor unrest, the unemployment, and on states' side, our recession? Is this a good time to push
precisely because of those issues. I don't think there's any chance of moving this issue forward. Now, the economic situation in Puerto Rico has been more or less on the same status for many decades. Now, for some people, like the statehood supporters, they see statehood as an economic form of changing Puerto Rico's economy. I doubt it, but that's their claim. Now, all sectors, including those supporting statehood, do want some kind of economic reform, but mostly they're waiting for Congress to act. Congress and the President. I don't think they'll do anything of that sort very soon.
So, Dr. Torres, is there no movement within Congress on this issue?
I don't see such movement either. Normally, this would be, this is an international issue. You know, Puerto Rico is one of just a handful of remaining colonies. After World War II, there were more than 100 nations which began a process of decolonizing. It's just incredible, but explainable that Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the United States, is not on that list of real decolonizing processes because the U.S. has never wanted this to be treated as an international question. And so they put that limit up, the political structures here, but yet they never make it clear to the Puerto Rican people. And this is what the Puerto Rican people want to know. What is your preference, U.S., Uncle Sam? You know, what do you really want to do with Puerto Rico? Tell us, because you've consulted with us many times over the last few decades. We've given you polls and we've indicated our preferences, and they vary over time. But in each time those consultations have taken place, you have never committed, this is the Puerto Rican people to the U.S. Congress, you have never committed these processes to a binding agreement. In other words, if we really tell you that we want statehood, will you guarantee, will the U.S. Congress guarantee a process that will lead to it? If we tell you we want independence, will the U.S. guarantee that this process, that this preference will be respected?
Let's talk about the option of decolonization. What would be the pros and cons of that solution?
First of all, we had to think about what process of decolonization, because right now what people in Congress and people in Puerto Rico are proposing is a process involving only Congress and the political parties in Puerto Rico. Now, some people question that that might be a real process of decolonization. Other sectors are proposing a process of decolonization through the UN, for example. And that's a different debate, a different process. So I don't see this Democracy Act being discussed right now as a true decolonization proposal at all.
What's been the media in Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican media here been reporting on the reinstatement of this commission?
As your piece showed, there is wide discontent with this process. It was more or less controlled by the governing party, the New Progressive Party, which favors statehood. They had hearings for only one day, and not all sectors of Puerto Rico were represented. For example, sectors from the independence position or the free association position were not allowed to speak to the commission. It's a very, it's not really well organized, and I don't think many people really care for this task force and what they can come up with.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. But this is a story we'll continue to follow. Dr. Edgardo Meléndez and Dr. Andrés Torres, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now here's Marlene Peralta with some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. GNA News.tv reports that the controversial Gay Rights Party in the Philippines can run in the May 10th elections. The decision was made after the Philippines High Court found that the party and Latlat comply with the legal requirements for accreditation as a party list group. The Commission on Elections had denied the Gay Rights Party the application for accreditation, claiming the group was advocating immorality and homosexuals were a threat to the youth. The U.S. Border Patrol Office has reported an increase in Haitians trying to enter the country illegally through the Canadian border, according to Carib News. Just in Vermont alone, authorities caught more than 100 Haitians crossing the border illegally since the January 12 quake. Border Patrol officials attribute this surge of illegal immigration to the Temporary Protected Status Policy, better known as TPS, extended to Haitian migrants who were in the United States on January 16th of this year. The Amsterdam News reports that the man responsible for killing Malcolm X was granted parole last month. According to the opinion letter, Thomas Hagen will be released from the New York State prison on April 28th. The news has been condemned by many, including members of the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee. Hagen and at least 4 other men assassinated Malcolm X on February 21, 1965, inside the crowded Audubon Ballroom. According to the Irish Echo, the recession has sparked the biggest baby boom in Ireland in almost 30 years. The country's Central Statistics Office reports that the number of babies born in the first quarter of 2009 was higher than those born in the year 1980. In fact, the number of babies born in those 3 months was almost 40% higher than it was at the height of the last boom in the year 2000. And finally, Diario de Mexico reports that New York City will have a lottery to grant permits to selected street vendors. The permits are only for those selling fruits and vegetables, and although the lottery will open in September, the local organization Vamos Unidos recommends that those interested should start the application process now. The permits will be granted through the Department of Health and Consumer Affairs. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Vianora, back to you.
Europe has finally agreed on a plan to rescue economically ailing Greece, but that doesn't mean the curtain has come down on the drama. The Greek government has had to impose some unpopular austerity measures, layoffs, salary cuts and tax increases to deal with its huge debt and budget deficit. To get an understanding of what all this means for the government and the people of Greece, I'm joined in studio by Dody Tsiantar, a business journalist who has been covering the story since the beginning. And joining us from Thessaloniki via Skype is Asteris Masouras, a contributor to Global Voices. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Asteris, what is the mood in Greece over this last loan from EU, the news of the 30 billion euros?
Well, there's been a protracted anxiety wave ever since the new government took over, because there were leaks, and rumors about austerity measures that weren't actually realized until about a month ago. And the second wave of measures that were imposed by the Eurozone ministers were even more austere than the previous wave. So people were sort of undergoing a psychological assault of leaks and measures announced and retracted. So there's some sort of frustration and anxiety, and also there's a feeling of general anger at the mismanagement of previous governments and at the impunity, because it's well known that political officers were involved in scandals, and there's been no there has been no justice served on those responsible for the mismanagement and corruption. So people are waiting for somebody to take some real measures.
What about the rescue package? How are people receiving the news?
Well, at first they were very much afraid that the IMF would step in and turn Greece into some sort of Zimbabwe or Iceland plan. Now it's been a day or so since the support frame was announced, and I guess there's some sort of mixed reaction about it, because there's also some wounded pride involved. We don't want to be rescued. We want to be able to stand on our own feet and be able to have a government that can employ fair tax measures. But it's on the other hand, it's better than having the IMF step in.
Well, it isn't clear yet what's going to happen. The money's been offered, but Greece hasn't asked for it yet. So we don't really know yet how this is going to unfold. The package will help the markets presumably trust that there's help to come if it's needed. But I think Greece at this point, he's right, that they don't want to go to the IMF if they can avoid it. But that might be the best and ultimate solution in the end, because the IMF may be able to offer the money at a lower rate than what the current European package does. The final package, as I understood it, might be a combination of both aid from Europe and the IMF eventually. Mm-hmm. But we're not there yet.
And Dody, you've written recently about Greeks' willingness to sacrifice in order to see their country recover. That's quite different from what Asteris is reporting from the ground. And you also said that old habits die hard. Which is it?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the Greek government, the Greek people know the party is over. They've lived for years in a relatively thriving economy. Especially the public sector has lived really large. It's probably way bloated, more so than it needs to be. There's almost 1 million public civil servants in Greece, which is a lot for the population of the country. If you take Austria, that's got roughly the same amount of population, has about 1/3 of that number. Civil servants tend to work have really nice perks. They work few hours. A lot of them are done by 2:30 in the afternoon. They're used to getting 15 or 14, correct me if I'm wrong, paychecks, which all are...
It's 14.
14. Yeah, that's right, 14, 2 extra ones. Those may all be...
Except the parliament officer that gets 16.
Oh, yeah. And those are all may not be in the future for Greece anymore, for Greek public servants.
So, Asteris, are these civil servants willing to make sacrifices in order to see the economy revived?
Well, the image is a bit more complex than that and contains elements from both observations. Greeks are very much self-criticizing, into self-criticizing all the time. If you ask a Greek on the street, he'll tell you all the problems of the country in 5 minutes flat.
He's right.
And
everyone's got an opinion.
An opinion, but most opinions are focused on the same issues. That there's mismanagement, corruption at base level. Everybody respects the status quo. That you have to have connections to go, to advance in life, and issues like that everybody is aware of, and everybody at some level wants to change that. They want to live with some dignity and impart that on their children. But on the other hand, there's also this rising anger because governments in the past have mismanaged EU funds, and there isn't, this public perception that everybody partook of this loot isn't exactly right. I mean, there are people, living on less than minimum wage, and even unemployed people. There's a lot of black labor in Greece.
It's going to get worse.
It's going to get worse, Dody says.
I think so, yeah. Unemployment's definitely going to go up. Prices aren't they more expensive now? I've heard from
things that they started getting up because the VAT has hitched up.
The VAT has gone up a little bit. There's a 20% tax on cigarettes and alcohol, I believe, and on luxury goods. Greeks like to spend money. They're spendthrifts. They like to go out. They like to spend freely. It's true, right? They're not savers. And I think this is now going to hit home pretty largely.
They used to be.
Used to be. It's almost like Greece has been pushed up to the edge of the wall, and now they know that if they don't change their ways, that things are going to, that they're going to go over the cliff.
I remember a time when people used to save money and impart frugality measures to their kids. We used to have that, but went away. With the moment we entered the EU, and we didn't have sort of values package along with financial package.
Well, the government too has to change the way it's functioned in the past.
And what's the likelihood of that happening, and how confident are you, Dody, that the corruption will be combated?
I'm optimistic because I think this current government is really working hard to change the way things are. I met with the finance minister back in January, George Papakostandino, and he convinced me in the course of a half an hour that they're really sincere about making these changes and that they're trying to be as transparent as possible. And I think all the moves that the Greek government has made since the crisis broke in October have been correct, and they're going in the right direction. When will they start to show effect? When will the revenue start catching up with the debt and then the deficit? It's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight. I think they'll work it out. The question is how much the markets will forgive them and give them a little leeway to be able to make do. There's something like, forgive me, I have to remember the number here. Greece is we'll see the first test. Greece is going to owe 11 billion euros by the end of May to meet its debt obligations.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, unfortunately, have to leave it here, but we'll keep an eye on new developments on this story. Asteris Masouras, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Dody Tsiantar, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
We'll be right back.
There is really only one boy. One girl. One tree. One forest. One deep, dancing ocean. One mountain calling. One handful of sand through our fingers. One endless sky overhead, and one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
The recent plane crash that killed the Polish president, his wife, and the majority of his cabinet has shaken Polish communities around the world. Here in New York, 2 reporters covering the story for the Polish daily Nowy Dziennik have found it equally challenging and therapeutic. Zyphus Lebrun reports.
President Kuczynski was an amazing man and a great friend of America.
St. Patrick's Cathedral is the latest stop for Ewa Kern-Jedrychowska and Aleksandra Slabisz, who have been bouncing around from Brooklyn to New Jersey, covering the local Polish community's response to Saturday's plane crash.
This is like 9/11 almost for New Yorkers and for Americans. The magnitude of it is so huge, and it's such an unthinkable tragedy.
It's just such a crazy time for us. We're all running around, you know, from event to event. We are on no sleep almost at all, and it's been emotion for us too.
Sorrow fills our hearts at this sad moment.
This service at St. Patrick's was originally meant to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the death of the beloved Pole, Pope John Paul II. But tonight, it's taken on a more painful meaning.
It's going to come down into history as a day commemorating 3 awful events. The death of John Paul II, the mass massacre of Polish officers in the Calle forest 7 years ago, and now the death of so many Polish officials, including the President of Poland.
It's that sort of emotional resonance that Jędrzejowska has been trying to convey to her American audience. She's been working double time on this story. She also wrote a piece for the New York Times weekend edition.
For the American audience, I just want to show what it's like to be Polish these days. Well, I think it is still a very emotional story, but, you know, they look at it from outside.
Jędrzejowska covered the aftermath of 9/11 for Nowy Dziennik and says this is an even harder story to work on.
You have to cope with it on a personal level, and at the same time you have to be strong enough to go into the community and, ask all the tough questions.
Slabisz has found that in asking the tough questions, she's been able to cope with her own feelings towards the plane crash. That was particularly the case when she wrote a story about Poles gathering in solidarity at the Katyn Monument in Jersey City.
Going to the Katyn Monument and uniting with the people helped me a lot. I think it would be horrible to stay home and just deal with it on your own.
But now Jędrzejowska says that's all they can do. Deal with the sadness of the loss of their leaders, then with the anxiety and excitement of choosing new ones. Zyphus Lebrun, Independent Sources.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week. In the meantime, be independent-minded.